So why did the ancients go to all that trouble to build these monuments? I mean, that is the question, and we're not entirely sure. We have some ideas and we have some clues, but the fact is that modern science just doesn't know. The whole fact that the ancient sites have and continue to have such a powerful effect on people is testament to the fact that they were probably put there for reasons other than decorative or landscaping, or they were ritualistic in all likelihood, and they were probably ritualistic, but to do with calendar, and at that time, you know, we're talking Bronze Age, Megalithic Age, all those sort of disciplines that we have as separate today were one. So I think there's residual energy, and I think there's an acknowledgement and a memory inside of each of us that these sites are the sites of our ancestors. I'm not convinced that the sites were built to leave a message for us today, but I wouldn't rule that out. You look at huge stone buildings like pyramids, and when did those sorts of temples and structures get built? Around 3000 BC. What happened then? A worldwide flood, global localized flood. So in the most fundamental way, I feel that those pyramids were built, those sort of Mesopotamian style, South American style sort of juggernauts, just so that if there's another flood, we have somewhere to go. We have somewhere to rise above it. So do the stones have a function? Did they have a function like that then? If they did, we can only speculate. One of the greatest mysteries, I think, is not so much what were they used for, but how did they build them, especially when the stone used to construct these monuments is typically brought from miles and miles, and in the case of the original, obvious, best example, Stonehenge, the original circle, from a different country. So how did that happen? There has to be a technology that we've forgotten. I can't imagine that there's a way they could have carried them or put them in a boat. Maybe there was a way that they became in tune with harmonics and somehow negated the what we know as gravity. In terms of whether or not we've forgotten a technology that was used to create these monuments, I'm a firm believer that they were constructed by our ancestors and there was no extraterrestrial contact. I hate to see that sort of theory put forward because it was us, humans, who did this. And I think there probably is a technology, and that technology that we may have forgotten may have something to do with getting in harmonics with these stones so they can be moved a lot easier. I hate to use the word levitate, but certain scientific experiments have shown that it's possible to negate, to some degree, the impact of gravity. So moving these stones, which they clearly did for hundreds of miles in some instances, to put them in a particular spot, well, that may offer an explanation. But the fact that all these sites, or many of them, appear to be connected, whether we're talking ley lines or just settlements of stone man-constructed monuments that appear to be part of a harmony of an intentional layout, we have to think that this is due to not a domestic necessarily settlement, but a ritualistic one. And again, all these disciplines merged as one back then. So science, priesthood, farming, agriculture, that was all sacred and all under the same umbrella, if you will. Well, I think modern science doesn't like to acknowledge the fact that there could have been a technique, there could have been an approach or a function that they don't understand. So there isn't an acknowledgement that these sites were, one, necessarily important, or two, constructed with anything that could potentially surpass modern day technology. I think that academia is going to have to really waken up and acknowledge that a lot of these sites are more ancient than they had previously acknowledged. And some sites in Turkey have recently been discovered. Some sites in southern Egypt and the Sudan have been discovered. And we're pushing the dates back to 5,000, 6,000, 9,000, 10,000 BC when these megaliths were constructed. And again, you know, the megaliths that we see, that's only typically maybe half of the monument. The other half is in the ground. So it just makes the entire thing even more of a mystery. Many ancient and many modern sites have been constructed with, for lack of a better term, earth energy, the acknowledgement that there's something special about this spot And it might be that there's water underneath. In London, Temple Church is built near Fleet Street. And what's underneath? River Fleet. It almost seems to be too much of a coincidence for that not to have been intentional. And I think the same is true with a lot of these megalithic monuments. Are assembled in such a way as that they appear to accentuate the energy and to let it perpetuate down a particular ley line or part of a settlement. I think we have put so much damage on the landscape. Go to Ireland, for instance, which is one of the most lovely countries in the world, full of wonderful megalithic monuments. And no disrespect to the Irish, but the houses they put on the landscape, just like from my country in the States, they're completely incongruous with what is around. And I think, I hate to talk about these sort of next eras, but I think going forward, you're going to see a lot more harmonious construction of houses and buildings with the landscape, and some of this will be underground, and I think less of it will be what we call skyscrapers today. It's going to be just a little bit more in tune with the harmony of the landscape. I think there's a lot of ways that we as individuals can connect with the landscape without having to live in a house that has a roof garden and solar energy. That takes money, that takes effort that every man or woman may not have an opportunity to implement. But for instance, the ancients and almost every culture from every epoch envisioned that their goddesses or gods lived in the stone. And thus they would have a stone that would hearken back to perhaps the sacred stone, which is in their temple, but they would have it in their home, in their temple. And the view is that these stones, especially meteorites are the most cherished megalith in the history of the planet. And it's because they came from the sky, and that's what the Grail is, supposedly by Eschenbach. It's a stone that fell from heaven, right? And that's a meteorite. So stones have always been sacred. There's stones in the temple of all sacred cultures. But I think by symbolically having a stone representing whatever our own theology is or isn't, it's just a way of personalizing it and bringing into the house what is outside of the house. The fact that you can go anywhere in the world and find the same structures, whether they be pyramids or even earlier, sort of the dolmen-shaped objects. You go to the pyramids, and what do you find next to the pyramid? Go to Dajur, to the Red Pyramid. Right next to it is a mortuary temple. Well, what's that? It's a dolmen, and you don't know which came first, really. And it almost harkens to the fact that there was a universal language, if not culture, that understood by augmenting the planet in certain ways and paying homage to the planet and their ancestors and what was above them. I mean, what was in the night sky was, that was their television. That's what they watched every night. That's what they worshipped. And by putting these megaliths and these temples on the ground, you have to believe they are in one way, shape, or form implementing an as above, so below philosophy that brought all of their universe together. So you could easily be excused for arguing that at some point in antiquity there was a common culture with a common language that had megaliths as their expression of that language.